Hi there, I'm popping in really quickly to let you know that registration is currently open for the next Room to Thrive support groups from now through January 31st, 2025, or whenever each group fills up. I created this educational support program to help you go from lost and alone to confident, supported, and connected in just 4 months. So I'm really excited this time to be offering 2 different groups that we're going to meet from February to May of 2025. One meets on Mondays at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, and the other meets on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern, and all of them are open to people worldwide. If you're on the fence, don't just take my word for it. Here's what Katie had to say when she took the program. I was lost and overwhelmed with my RA diagnosis. It felt overwhelming to know what to read, what to do, how to spend my energy trying to research on the internet. Room to Thrive did that for me. It's been like getting a crash course in my diagnosis along with a community who gets it. So if you're interested in joining, don't delay, as each group is capped at 16 people in order to maintain the small, intimate group atmosphere. And the program is specifically designed for people with rheumatic diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, or spondyloarthritis, but people with any chronic illness are welcome to join. I also offer scholarships and pay what you can options. To see all the details or sign up, go to the link in the show notes or the Arthritis website at www.myarthritislife.net. Thanks so much. Hi there. I am so excited to be telling you a little bit about today's episode. So the current me recording this right now is recording this in January 2025. And this is 5 years actually after I initially recorded what the majority of this episode is, which is the best advice for people newly diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And this is one of my favorite episodes, to be honest. Not that I have favorites, they're all amazing, but this is one that I find myself referring a lot of people to. I get approached on social media or through email or comments on the YouTube, by people who say, like, I just got diagnosed. I've literally had people email me where they're like, I got diagnosed 2 hours ago. What do I do? Like, I feel so lost and overwhelmed and confused. And so I like to be able to refer them to this episode, because not only are you getting my perspective as somebody who's lived with rheumatoid arthritis for now over 2 decades, but you're also, in my occupational therapy perspective, you're also going to hear from 17 other patients, some from voice notes, some from written contributions with their, best advice. And it's actually for newly diagnosed patients. And it's actually something that, if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you've probably heard me ask at the very end of every episode, or at the rapid fire questions. I ask each person I interview, whether they're a health provider or patient, I'll ask them, what is your best advice for newly diagnosed patients? So just a couple additional insights. So when I recorded this, it was maybe 4.5 years ago. I had facilitated at that point 2 support groups total, and my very first beta program, and then my second group. And they were both wonderful. And what's really, really, really fun for me now is looking back and realizing that, I'm 5 years into this, or 4.5, whatever. Let's not get caught up in the dates, but I now have facilitated support groups under the different names, whether we call it Room to Thrive, or I used to call it the Rheumatoid Arthritis Roadmap Support Group. I've done support groups for over 250 people at this point. So right now, I can actually say that these main 6 themes discussed in this episode are still the same core themes that I help people work through in the more intensive support group environment. And, I think that that's just a testament to, there are some kind of core needs that we have after receiving a life-changing, chronic, lifelong diagnosis. And so in this episode, you're going to hear a lot of great advice, again, great wisdom. And, a couple other things I would just add to here. I talked a little about social media and being, careful about where you get your advice from when you're looking for medical advice online. I think what I wish I would have also said is to see whether what you're reading online, is it medically reviewed? Is it reviewed by somebody with some medical training? Patients are experts in their own care, but having that medical curation can help make sure that there isn't anything that a patient it's like, you don't know what you don't know. So you might say something like, oh, well, it's possible it's possible for anyone to, feel better after XYZ medication. Or it's possible for you to feel better because it worked for me. And it's actually like, well, technically, because something works for one person does not mean it's going to work for you. So we have to be careful about like how we phrase things. So that's one thing I would just say. Another thing is I want to emphasize in this episode, I talk about having people on your team, your medical and your care team, besides just you and your rheumatologist. So I stand by that recommendation. But I would also say, I mentioned a few different, healthcare providers like physical therapists, psychologists, occupational therapists, certified hand therapists. And one that I'm wanting to bring more attention to is a MD or doctor field called physical medicine and rehabilitation doctors, or sometimes called physiatrists. I would also add them. They are kind of like the doctor version of physical therapists. They do a lot of the same things that like orthopedic people do, but they just don't do orthopedic like surgery. So that's another thing to add. And one more thing just about, I'm always talking about the emotional and mental side, giving yourself tools to cope with the ups and downs. And I think, I've tried over the years to find new ways to talk about acceptance and talk about the importance of, accepting not just that you have rheumatoid arthritis or inflammatory arthritis, but accepting the uncertainty that can bring. And I will say, some of these things are going to be a work in progress. They're going to be, perpetual challenges for us. I don't like uncertainty, but over time I can say, even though it still bothers me, I have a better sense of peace with uncertainty now. So that's a little preview and a few extra insights. Also, I want to bring your attention to, in the show notes, I have a link to a webinar I did earlier this month called Welcome to Rheumatoid Arthritis, Tips for Navigating Your New Normal. I'm actually a very visual learner, which is kind of hilarious given that I have a podcast. But in that training, you can sign up for a link to get the link to the YouTube recording. I have a lot of visuals and diagrams for some of these concepts I talk about in this episode, and some more additional specific ideas that are going to help you cope with your new normal. And so I think that if you're more of a visual learner, I highly recommend checking that out as well. So without further ado, I will move on to this Encore presentation of the Arthritis Live podcast, where I'm re-releasing, what was actually episode number 4, best advice for people with newly diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And then, now it's episode 155 with these additional insights. So thank you so much. And I hope to see some of you in some of the upcoming Room to Thrive groups. See the details for that also in the show notes. Okay, let's get started. Bye-bye for now. Are you ready to hear some truth bombs? On today's episode, I'm going to be sharing my best advice for newly diagnosed patients. But you won't only get to hear from me. Actually, 17 other patients either emailed or called and shared voicemails of their best advice. So you are not going to want to miss this episode. Trust me. Today, I'll be sharing advice for newly diagnosed patients. But honestly, a lot of this is still really relevant to me 17 years after my initial diagnosis. So I'm pretty confident it's going to be relevant to pretty much everyone, not just people newly diagnosed. This episode is a lot, so I've organized it into 6 main themes. At first, we're going to talk about how to adjust immediately after your diagnosis, which is kind of an often overlooked time. Then I'm going to share the tips on how to best go about educating yourself about your condition. And then I'm going to explore how to best use social support, how to have a good relationship with your doctors and medical team, and then how to choose the best treatment plan for you. And then we'll conclude with talking about the best ways to manage your mind and to be kind to yourself as you cope with the stress of a new diagnosis and the new way of life. Okay, so let's start with the beginning, that initial diagnosis. I'm going to share an analogy that applies here, but it's actually from Emily Pearl Kingsley's classic essay called Welcome to Holland. She wrote that to kind of share with other people what it's like to be a parent of a child with special needs, but I've adapted it to apply to the situation of inflammatory arthritis as well. Okay, so imagine you have been planning a trip to France. You've read the guidebooks, you booked your tours, you planned the perfect Instagram-worthy photo shoot at the Eiffel Tower, you've made reservations at the best restaurants, and you are ready for France. But at the end of your 12-hour plane ride, the announcer suddenly gives you a warm welcome to Spain. Wait, Spain? What is going on? You didn't plan for this. You planned for France, not Spain. You ask the flight attendant, and they simply explain the plane has been rerouted to Barcelona. And let's just pretend, for the sake of argument, you can't really easily get from Barcelona to France. Now, not only has your destination changed, but your body seems to have changed too. The things that used to seem easy for you are suddenly harder and more painful. You get tired after the 15-minute walk from the deplaning area to the baggage claim. Your hands are achy when you try to put your clothes on after you go into the bathroom. So you don't just have to get used to a new way of life in Spain, you also have to get used to a new body that you're inhabiting now. You desperately want to find a way to France, to the journey that you had planned and the way your body used to work. But the thing is, this is where you are now. Something happened in that airplane, and this is your new normal. Okay, so I think you get the idea of this metaphor now, right? A life with rheumatoid arthritis or any other chronic illness is like the Spain of this story. Having your life rerouted is a huge deal, and you are likely to have big emotions about that. And I encourage you to just feel those feelings and give yourself permission to grieve what you lost. Spain is not France. Your body is not the same, and you will likely always miss the idea of France and the body you once had on some level. But at the same time, don't get lost in your grief for what could have been. Given that Spain is your permanent destination now, the sooner you learn to adapt to it, the better. So don't let your grief blind you to all the possibilities that are still available in your new world. As Gemma from Rheumatoid Diaries said on Instagram, take time to come to terms with your diagnosis and be kind to yourself. Take it one day at a time. And when I facilitate support groups for people with rheumatoid arthritis, I often remind them that finding the balance between grief and adapting to your new normal takes a little time for most people. It'll be kind of like a teeter-totter, where sometimes you're going to be unbalanced towards one end or the other for a little while. So try to just be patient with yourself. As Monica Thomas said on Facebook, the new diagnosis is part of your life journey, and yet it doesn't define you. You will learn to navigate. Be patient and be kind to yourself. Thanks, Monica. Mary Beth, also on Instagram at boop911, which I love, she had 3 things to say about this stage. 1, know that this is not the end of the world. However, allow yourself to be sad for the life you thought you were going to have. You are entitled to that. 2, be filled with hope that you are going to learn to take better care of yourself. You're going to meet some amazing new friends that are all fellow spoonies. By the way, spoonie is a metaphor for people with chronic illness. I'll talk about that more later. 3, start finding ways now to laugh at yourself, because at some point things will get you down. For example, you'll drop a million things a day and you'll need that humor to carry through. I really love that last point, especially thinking about the things like, dropping things, and it's so true that it's easy to get frustrated with yourself, but if you can find humor, it will go a long way for your mental health. And actually, I think that's been one of the most fun parts for me about social media, is connecting to other patients through humor. But the next stage I want to talk about is after the initial shock wears off, you start facing the reality that you're actually, yes, in Spain, in rheumatoid arthritis land, or in other inflammatory arthritis land, and it just makes sense to look for a guidebook to how to live here, right? This is what I call the education phase. So educating yourself about your condition sounds like such an obvious thing. But many of us have grown up thinking that being a patient in the medical system is like a passive experience. You go to the doctor, she tells you what's wrong, she gives you the treatment, and that's kind of it. That's what it's like when you're a kid, right? Well, a kid without a chronic illness, I should say. But this model applies to short-term acute illnesses, like an ear infection. But what about long-term ones? Since you're going to have inflammatory arthritis the rest of your life, you actually need to learn how to make decisions, how to learn what the disease is all about, you need to learn about the medications and what to actually do on a daily basis to live and cope with this. So because this phase can be so overwhelming, I developed, a program that I think is really great to help people go through the learning process with support and guidance so they don't have to do it all on their own. But anyway, most people, as I said, have to figure out how to manage it all on their own. And they have lots of advice for you. So Stacy from Instagram says, as someone who has had RA for 45 years after being diagnosed with juvenile idiopathic arthritis, I think the best thing a newly diagnosed person can do is educate yourself. RA is much more than a disease that causes joint pain. Yes, that's so true. And Laura Muller on Facebook said, I am a huge advocate for empowering the patient, making sure they have a seat at the table when key decisions are made in terms of access to medicines, but also that a patient has the tools, resources, and knowledge to sit across the table from doctors and have informed and critical conversations. Too often in the past, Laura says, I used to take what a doctor said as gospel, and only in recent years, after having done extensive reading, I started working alongside doctors and developing treatment plans versus just accepting what I was told. Laura, that is really great advice. I kind of want to say that to everyone, but you really are a partner with your doctor when it's a chronic illness. It's not just a passive thing. Leslie from Hope Amid the Pain on Instagram kept it nice and simple, and she said, remember to listen to your body and educate yourself. You know you better than anyone, which that's so simple, but it's actually hard for me to remember sometimes to just do the simple task of slowing down and listening to my body. So I thought that was great. Jackie from Instagram said, my advice is to not only do research yourself, but have a support network that does research too. My husband often notices things or thinks of different questions to ask the doctor than I do. Also, don't be discouraged if close family doesn't get it. Along with my husband and a few friends, the online community is amazing. Thank you, Jackie. So again, if anything around this topic is really overwhelming to you, make sure to check out the show notes. The next thing is that we need to talk about social connections and social media. So for better or for worse, social media is one of the most common sources of information about your disease. And I'm part of lots of different social media groups, and at least once a day, I'll see a newly diagnosed patient post about their journey and ask for support and guidance, which is great. It's only natural to want to talk to others who've been there before you. But I really have come to see social media as a double-edged sword. There are lots of incredible things like social support and sharing of ideas, but there are also some really problematic things like people sharing misinformation about miracle cures or scaring each other away from taking potentially helpful medications. So, really with social media, my best advice is to take everything with a grain of salt. Think about when you read restaurant reviews, you don't expect that you're going to agree with the taste of every single person that reviewed that restaurant, right? One person's favorite dish is another one's least favorite, and what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another. So in a similar way, treatments really vary between patients, and what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another. So while it's often said in rheumatology and in chronic illnesses that patients become the expert in their own journeys and care, that is totally true and valid, but that doesn't mean that you as a patient are an expert in someone else's care. You're an expert in your own journey and your own care on your treatment team, but that doesn't mean that you have the ability to understand what's going on in someone else's body. And so I would encourage you both on the giving and receiving end on social media to obviously feel totally empowered to share your own journey, but be careful in making assumptions that what worked for you will work for someone else. So in general, it's hard to make like black and white rules, but I like to say, I go to social media for social support and for maybe daily living hacks and adaptations. But when looking for like really detailed evidence and learning about different treatment options and medications, I really recommend using like a higher quality source of information like nonprofits or medical centers. And a general rule of thumb is, websites ending in like .org or .edu tend to be really a lot more heavily vetted through like making sure they're reviewed by scientists and other experts. So, but again, find your own balance, do what works for you. So, not surprisingly, the audience also chimed in with some great ideas about social support in general, not just social media. So, and also not surprisingly, people didn't necessarily agree on the best way to go about this. So, for example, the Narcissist Games recommends that you talk to other patients before you make a decision about treatment. However, Deepa said, do not Google, do not join negative Facebook groups, and they will drive you to depression. And I have to say, I have heard that many times, that people have gone to groups that are kind of having a vibe of like complaining and venting, which again, there's a time and place to grieve and vent, but they can give you a warped sense of what's actually possible out there. And I always remind people, the people who are doing well on medications, like for the first 5 years after I started Enbrel, I was in complete medicated remission, which meant I had no symptoms of RA in my daily life. I just took the medication. And so I was playing soccer, I was swing dancing, I was traveling the world, so I was living my life completely, in a way that didn't really have to take my disease into account other than the medications. So I wasn't on any Facebook groups or social media groups because I didn't really need to process it. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, go to the doctor, get your meds. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated for me now, but remember, the people who are doing great on medications aren't necessarily active on social media. That's the point. And now I'm going to play you 3 voicemails that kind of explore this topic of social support. And I really love these, so I hope that you enjoy them too.
My name is Fiona Malan, and I go by Malan's Musings on here. I was diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis 2 years ago, and I live in London. It was like a bomb being dropped, and I think it depends on who's breaking the news to you, but mine was quite negative and doom and gloom, and my current rheumatologist was mortified. But I would suggest, I think that you immediately turn to Google and Facebook for forums, and I think you need to be careful with that because a lot of it can be despairing. I would suggest reaching out to the charities and websites such as, well, over in London there's NAS for ankylosing spondylitis and versus Arthritis for all kinds of arthritis. Suggest getting in touch with them and trying to speak to people who are your age. The stories are really varying when you can get in touch with those groups because it's such a spectrum, and you can fall into the milder category, which is fabulous, or, you might fall somewhere else along the spectrum, and it's good to get in touch because I think there are positive stories and help on how to manage, as opposed to just reading something on the internet. It's good to maybe speak to someone as well. If you want, you could get a second opinion also, and make sure you're happy with the care you're receiving at your hospital. I think that's really important. Make sure you have a rheumatologist and a team that are really supportive and encouraging. I moved hospitals because one of my doctors suggested it. She didn't think that my rheumatology team was giving me everything that I needed, and I'm really happy that I moved. So yeah, make sure you're happy with your care and that someone who can listen to you.
So my advice to everyone and to any single person that's new, even if you don't know anyone with this condition at the moment, even if you're the first one in your family to have it, or even if you're one of the ones in your family that does have it and you know how it goes, know that you are never ever alone. There is this huge community of amazing warriors out there on social media that you can easily connect to, and we all love to talk. We all always want to talk to each other, support each other in many, many ways possible. Now, one more advice to everyone would be to simply try things out. You'll probably hear a lot of things about nutrition, about supplements, about exercise, and just try these things out. See what works for you and your body, because we are all so individually different. What works for one person might not work for another. So give it a go for a few weeks. See how it makes you feel, and you never know, maybe something natural that doesn't involve medication can help you feel at least a little bit better, which is a win, right?
Hi, my name is Effie Koleopoulos, and I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I've lived with juvenile idiopathic arthritis for 15 years. My best advice for newly diagnosed patients is to not be scared of taking medication. No matter what your treatment plan looks like, act fast and don't delay. And just know if you do feel scared, it's okay, and don't hesitate to reach out for support and help if you need so. There are so many people out there online, social media, even in your own network and where you live, and doctors have a lot of resources as well.
Okay, now I want to talk about how to best work with your medical team. So my biggest advice here is to just utilize all the available resources, because many people think that they can only get help from like their rheumatologist and rheumatology nurse, but there are actually so many other health providers who can help you, including, pharmacists, social workers, occupational therapists. Of course, I am an occupational therapist, so I'm a little bit partial to us, but also physical therapists, counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, podiatrists, certified hand therapists, and all sorts of alternative medicine providers like naturopaths. So when it comes to finding a provider in the first place, Kim Isu from Instagram reminds you that, you might have to change rheumatologists a few times before you find a good fit. And that's good advice across the board for specialists. So if you don't like your first provider, you have the right to try to find another one that's a better fit for you. And Deepa from Instagram has great advice here. She says, be your own health leader and set goals to work with your medical team. Jackie also says, and always, always, always advocate for yourself. You know yourself better than anyone else can. I thought that was great. And I was also lucky to hear from Dr. Maggie Cadet, who's an amazing rheumatologist in New York, who, by the way, if you're not following her on Instagram already, you should be. She posts often and she has amazing reflections to share. And she said, from a physician perspective, I want and need patients to educate themselves as well as with the physician guidance to stay active, be open with questions about therapies, be honest about physical and psychological symptoms, and be an active participant in their care, and not lose hope. Wow, so much advice packed into one quick paragraph. And I really love what Dr. Cadet said about being an active participant in your care. And so self-management is actually the term, and I know it kind of sounds vague, but it's the kind of medical term for the things patients do on a daily basis to manage our condition. Everything from diet and exercise to taking rest breaks to conserve your energy to practicing meditation for stress management. So I want to talk a little bit more deeply about treatment ideas now. Deepa from New Jersey recommends that you remember there is absolutely hope for a pain-free, active, healthy life even with RA. Remain active, move even when it hurts. Meditation and yoga are very underrated to combat physical and mental pain. And Ashley from Instagram says, check your diet and journal every day, things that you put in your mouth and the reaction the next day. So certainly the diet is probably the biggest area of, how would I put this? Diet is the area that there seems to be a huge variance between people. So you'll hear like on one side of the spectrum, somebody who went vegan and had amazing results for their RA. Someone else went keto, which is like kind of almost the opposite of vegan, and they also had great results. And it's really the case that that it's going to take some trial and error for most people to see what in your individual body works. But there definitely are quite a few, anecdotal stories and some research articles that show that, certain foods can trigger, symptoms in different patients. So the symptoms either being fatigue or pain. And one anonymous entry said, don't feel bad when you need a break and keep track of what helps you feel better. And I wanted to put a quick plug in for chronic illness behavior coaching and behavior analysis. Is something that I've learned a little bit more about recently, because I had known about behavior analysis from working with children with developmental disabilities, but actually the behavior analysts or board certified behavior analysts can also help you with health related behaviors, because I think a lot of us get to a point where you know what to do, right? You know that you're supposed to do diet and exercise, but you don't necessarily know how to get yourself to actually do it. And secondarily, you also sometimes don't know how to take data on your own symptoms and how your behaviors affect your symptoms. So the example of diet and food is an example of finding a correlation between a behavior you take during the day, like AKA I'm eating something really sugary, and then what is the effect of that behavior. Like, did that cause more symptoms in you or did it not? So behavior analysts can help you with that stage, which is really great. I'll link to one, Kristen from Warriors Move Mountains, in the comments. She's on Instagram. She shares a lot, and she's also a patient, so she gets it. And so the other thing I wanted to say about treatment ideas is that I've seen over and over again patients go through like a predictable cycle. So at first, we all naturally as human beings want to look for a shortcut. And so the thing that people ask about on social media is, do I really need to take these scary medications? Has anyone done a diet or a natural cure for this? So this is a super valid and totally normal question to ask. But the honest answer that I kind of alluded to earlier is that there is no one diet or one natural cure that is guaranteed to work for everyone, but just like there's no prescription medicine that is absolutely 100% guaranteed to work for anyone either. So, of course, there are some people who try the natural route and experience relief, and I honestly believe they have really good intentions when they come onto social media and share their success stories. But I have to say it's problematic when they assume that what worked for them will necessarily work for someone else. So the fact is, inaction is an action, is an action. So is space and space action. Not taking Western medicine immediately after your diagnosis is one action that can directly cause harm to your body, because there's a wealth of evidence that shows that early disease control through medication can give you the best chance at preventing long-term deformity and disease activity. And all you have to do is look at case studies from all the patients before the 1990s who had rheumatoid arthritis. So in the 1990s, the better treatments started becoming available, like disease-modifying anti-rheumatic agents, and then late 90s, early 2000s, the biologics became widely available. And, before that point, an RA diagnosis was a guarantee of lifelong joint deformity and pain for most people, the ones that didn't, have the fortune to go into like spontaneous remission. Simply, it is not the case now with modern medicines that it is a guarantee of long-term deformity. You have a much, much better case of living a quote-unquote normal life. I don't like the word normal. It's kind of problematic, especially, again, with my background with working with people with developmental disabilities. But, living a full life without pain is actually possible for many people with rheumatoid arthritis. So, unfortunately, something to do with the human mind, how our brains are wired, makes it really hard for us to see the risk of inaction, of not taking a medicine. What we tend to focus on is the cost or the risk of the medicine itself, which I am not going to deny exists. The medications do have side effects, and that is true, but they're not guaranteed for everyone to experience. There's a big medical disclaimer on all these episodes and all my content. I'm not giving you medical advice or medication advice. I'm trying to share, the observations I've made and, how I came to my own decisions about the medication aspect of treatment, and to help you kind of think through your own decisions. So, I approached this with a super open mind, and I looked at all the available evidence. I have a master's in occupational therapy, which is a health field. So I have some, experience with, I'm not a doctor, but I have experience with, reading scientific journal articles and evidence. And it was just really clear to me that my rheumatologist's recommendations about, taking the medications were absolutely, going to give me the best chance of long-term disease control. And that was in the beginning stages. And, since then, I have explored other routes, and I've talked to a naturopath. I'm very lucky living in the Northwest. We have some really, really well-trained naturopathic doctors that, in my case, I have one that actually also has an autoimmune disease, which is just like, you're a unicorn. I'm so happy. And she has given me some advice as well. And again, it's really, medical advice has to be tailored to your own history, your own situation. And so, that's what I've been able to do is, continue looking at the best available evidence, looking at my own history, that the severity of my disease is such that I am continuing on the Western medication route, but I'm always open to and experimenting with other things as well. Because, hey, like my old soccer coach used to say, control the controllable, or, he used to say that in terms of like the referees. But I could ramble on about my own journey forever. But, it's very common in the beginning to struggle about whether to try the natural roots or Western medicine. And it's often posed as this like either or. And hopefully I didn't make it too much that way, but I even my own mind falls into that trap sometimes. But really, there's a lot of wisdom in, making the decisions based on the best available science at first, which is, in my case, I found that the best available evidence was for the Western medicines. But then, you can, then try the other alternative routes, because if there's, randomized control trials are like a gold standard in scientific evidence. But what I joke about with both my Western and my naturopathic, doctors is, no one has done a randomized control trial on me. And at the end of the day, I am the one that is at the, facing the consequence of my treatment plan, right? So, if it turns out that for me, like I was joking to my doctor, if it turns out that I just need to stand up and spin around 3 times and eat, 5 gummy bears, like, even though there's no evidence for that, if I do that and it's not that hard and it works, why wouldn't I want to do that, right? So there's also patients who have started with a Western medication route, kind of putting their eggs in the basket of the area where there's the most rigorous evidence, but then they've also at the same time tried the natural cures or natural routes. There's many of them, it's not just one, and they've been able to control their disease with natural things like diet and such, and then they've been able to slowly wean off their Western medications over time. Or it's been kind of an up and down process. Maybe their disease severity has gone down and they've been able to do the diets and then that work for them, but then maybe they their disease gets a little bit worse, and then they have to go back on the Western medicines for a little while. And so, it's not such a black and white either or. But, for me, I just wanted to share my thinking on it, because it is such a common question, especially, for newly diagnosed patients. So, kind of to go back to the 10,000 foot view of, being a newly diagnosed patient and looking at different treatment plans, I wanted to replay something from Sarah Dillingham's interview, because she pointed to 3 things that help her manage her rheumatoid arthritis and a rheumatoid disease, and it's the same thing, it's just a different name for it. And I thought they'd be really helpful for you as well. So let's listen to that.
I find it's really good, to optimize your management of your illness. For me, what works is being in supportive patient communities that I can vent, because I don't want to wear out my family all the time with it. Having a good rheumatology team, and also then being able to have access to really solid information from people like Arthritis Foundation. So I think those 3 things coming together, it really makes a good difference for me. Having all that is really helpful.
Okay, so now we're getting towards the end. We need to talk a little bit more in depth about how to manage the mental side of things. So autoimmune diseases, and basically anything that causes chronic pain at some point, will cause stress for most people. So you are not weak for struggling or needing support. My journey was a little bit interesting because I didn't start going to therapy until my son was 1 year old, and I was having some issues adjusting to, what I was still considering postpartum at the time. And, I originally thought that was mostly what we were going to talk about, parenting and adjusting, but we actually ended up spending a lot of time processing my chronic illness journey and how my health condition was affecting my feelings of being really overwhelmed as a new parent. And then I realized through therapy, how much I could have benefited from it earlier. So my biggest advice in the mental health area is to not wait until things are really bad before you get started with a therapist. And one of the reasons is it can take a while to find a good fit. So it's better to get the ball rolling when things aren't super, super bad and you're not in a crisis. So that way you have someone who already knows a bit of your history, and you can call on them if or when things get worse. So I've ended up having 2 therapists over the last 6 years. One is the psychologist I mentioned, and then the other is a psychiatrist. And I wanted to share one of the funniest conversations I ever had with my psychiatrist, who, by the way, he provides hour-long therapy sessions. So not everyone knows that psychiatrists do full therapy, not just medications. But he said, oh, it sounds like you've, gotten really good at figuring out how to manage your life so that you feel in control and you avoid your anxiety triggers most of the time. And I was like, yeah, thanks for the compliment. I'm amazing. And he's like, no, that wasn't a compliment. And I was like, what? But so I didn't get it at first because it made so much sense to me. Like, anxiety is painful. And so I've learned how to avoid situations that cause anxiety. So I control my life so I don't feel anxious. And, but what he was getting at, and this is a longer conversation, but avoidance is actually not a good long-term strategy for anxiety because it's kind of built on this illusion, which is the illusion is that you can actually control your life to avoid anxiety and that avoiding it is a good thing. But really, anxiety is just a normal response to fear. And, if you're going to live a full life, you are going to feel some degree of anxiety at some point, So we need to actually learn how to cope with situations that trigger it. If we only focus on avoiding it, we never actually build our capacity or our ability to cope with anxiety. So anxiety and all kind of uncomfortable emotions, I've learned, they're not something to be feared or, problems to be solved. They're just part of life to be able to sit with and really tolerate over time. It doesn't mean you have to like them, but you can't live your life completely trying to avoid discomfort at all costs because you're going to end up living small. So, and also it's just not possible. You literally can't avoid pain in life, whether that's physical or psychological. So, I'm going to delve into this more in later episodes, but the technique I found the most helpful from both my psychiatrist and psychologist is acceptance and commitment therapy, which is also known as ACT. And the word acceptance is definitely commonly misunderstood, but it doesn't mean resignation. It doesn't mean thinking that things will never get better. It means, it's a mindfulness-based approach that means in the moment being able to sit with or tolerate whatever is happening without trying to change it or alter your perception of it, just being able to literally sit with the world and with your situation exactly how it is in the moment and being willing to do that. So, it's taught me that I can live a full life now, even with pain or with anxiety, and that I don't need to avoid them at all cost. Ushma, who's also an inflammatory arthritis patient from the world of OT, she shared some similar wisdom. And she said, practice embracing uncertainty, letting go, and not being in control. It will take you a long way. And I just resonated so much with that. Uncertainty is definitely the other trigger for me, anxiety trigger. So, when I don't know the right path or, what to do, I tend to feel really anxious, and that's really, really common. I mentioned earlier with medications and treatment plans, there is going to be uncertainty. No one's ever going to be able to have a crystal ball at this point. It is not realistic to expect anyone to have a crystal ball to say, you should take this or you will do great if you take that. So you have to learn how to be able to cope with uncertainty. And Chris on Facebook said, because you have a name, because you finally have a name for what's been going on with you, you might be depressed that there's no cure. This is totally normal and human. Strive hard to rest your soul. We can't totally control it, but stress and worry are killers. And try to accept yourself. Morrissey saying, I am human and I need to be loved just like everyone else does. And that's a great starting point. I love that. I also received 2 voicemail entries that built on this idea. So let's hear them now.
Hi there, my name is Kayla. I'm from British Columbia, Canada, beautiful West Coast. I've had rheumatoid arthritis for about 10 years. However, it took me almost 8 years to get diagnosed. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 20 years old, even though my symptoms started when I was 12. My best advice is to grieve. Find whatever you need to do to look after your mental health during that time, because it's a big thing. You really need to make sure that you're taking care of your mental health as well as your physical health.
Next, we're going to hear from Heidi Wimmer. I really love her message here, and I hope you do too.
Would say stay positive. because every day is different. There are going to be good days and great weeks and bad days and bad months. But find those positive moments in life and hold on to them, because they'll get you through the roughest times. It's only been a year for me, but I have been able to find the positive in the darkest moments where I feel like this is the end, like my body is never going to go back. I'll never be able to feel happy or joy or get out of this pain. And I will think of a time that makes me happy. And I find that positive where I did a load of laundry. I folded a stinking load of laundry that day. Even though nothing else got done, I got laundry done when I was in the most excruciating pain. All I can say is to anybody that's newly diagnosed, it's not the end of the world. It feels like it's the end of the world, but it's not. In fact, it's the beginning of a great adventure for you to rediscover who you are with this disease as a part of your life, but not who you are. It's an addition to life, a life that you didn't know you had, and you can find new things that you love, new things that you can enjoy, new things to discover. I wanted to hike the rim to rim Grand Canyon. I wanted to run a marathon at Disneyland. And I still plan to do the Disneyland. And my husband said, if it means I put you in a wheelchair and I'm the one who pushes you through this run, or I'm the one who carries you across the line, he's like, then I'll do it. But it's our adventure together. It's finding what makes you unique and enjoying what makes you happy. Sorry, I babble on and on. It's about finding joy and peace in the darkness and finding out your new.
Wow, that was so eloquent. Okay, so we're getting to the actual conclusion of this episode now. So I have a lot more I want to say, but I really want to just conclude with the idea that, to the newly diagnosed patient, I want to say you can do this. You might not want to do this, to live with this disease, but you can. As Glennon Doyle Melton says, we can do hard things. I really repeat that to myself a lot. Finding that balance in your life between grieving what you lost and embracing what you still have is hard. So, be kind to yourself. And remember, at first, you're going to feel kind of like a tourist in a new land with having to learn all this stuff about arthritis and chronic illness. But pretty soon, you're going to be feeling and acting like a local. And, I have some resources for you I want to, wrap up with, because I've spent a lot of time creating them specifically to help people who are newly diagnosed. And one is called The 6 Things Everyone with Arthritis Should Know, and the other is my Master RA Checklist. And that shows you all the steps needed to organize your life and manage your condition. And of course, I also have, like I mentioned earlier, my paid online education and support program. So check out the link in the show notes to sign up. And, I have done all the work of collecting the most important tips for managing pain, fatigue, stress, social effects of RA, and even like logistical stuff like how to be a patient, how to track your symptoms. And you can try to figure this out all on your own, but honestly, it takes a lot of people years. And what's been interesting is that some of the people that have had the most the most strong testimonials have been people who've actually lived with the disease for longer. And I think the reason for that is that they understand how hard it is to try to figure this out, and so how valuable it is to have it all kind of organized for you. But here is a testimonial from a patient who took it back in June, who was recently diagnosed. And she says, Sarah, she says, I had so many questions about my symptoms and how to manage this disease that I wasn't able to ask my medical team. Getting valuable information each week about things that really matter to me from somebody who gets it was so helpful. It's obvious that Cheryl really cares about the people enrolled and goes out of her way to answer questions and give explanations. The social support that comes with this course is also invaluable. I now feel so much less alone and way more confident in managing my illness. So that made me so happy to read that. That is exactly why I created it. And, I also just created a free Facebook group for anyone who's listening to this podcast to connect further. We will have a wonderful week. And let me know any comments, questions, concerns, criticisms from this episode. Thanks. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Arthritis Life podcast. This episode is brought to you by Room to Thrive, an educational program I created from scratch to help you go from overwhelmed to confident, supported, and connected in a matter of weeks. You can go through the pre-recorded course on your own, or you can take the course along with a support group. Learn more at the link in my show notes, or you can always go to www.myarthritislife.net. And if you like this podcast, I would be so honored if you took the time to rate and review it. I also encourage you to share it with anyone you know who might benefit from it. I also wanted to remind you that you can find full transcripts, videos, and detailed show notes with hyperlinks for each episode on my website, www.myarthritislife.net. If you have any ideas for future episodes, or if you want to share your story or wisdom on the podcast, just shoot me an email at info@myarthritislife.net. I can't wait to hear from you.